So I just watched the most recent episode of Love Unseen Beneath the Clear Night Sky, and this will be a quicker video. It won't be a long, drawn-out video, because there's not a ton to talk about, but there's some major things to talk about, right? Now, for starters, I'm gonna be honest. This romance anime is bringing me so much freaking sadness, and I'm gonna be honest. I watch a lot of romance anime just to make me feel good, right? It feels nice, makes me happy, makes me smile, makes me kick my feet. That's like the whole point of the channel. I started watching this romance anime and I was thinking, oh, this is so cute. I love them both, right? I love Fuyutsuki, I love Sarano. And then we have progressed through the anime, and slowly but surely it's making me sadder and sadder. But I will say I'm gonna sit here and I probably will cope like crazy, because this episode was ridiculously sad and depressing. But there's certain things that make me think certain things, aka make me like, think that Fuyutsuki doesn't actually have her memory lost. That makes me think like, okay, like it's gonna get worse before it gets better. But there's a small part of me that thinks that everything's gonna be okay, at least for a little bit. Now, I want to talk about it, right? Let's talk about why I feel this way. Now, for starters, the episode has a lot to do centering around Fuyutsuki and essentially her being in the hospital, stuff like that. Now, I will say this is when essentially her friends are like, oh, I want to see her again. I want to somehow get through to her. Obviously, that's not going to work, right? Supposedly, if she really has amnesia, it's not going to be that simple. But there's a lot of things that get brought up, especially in the beginning of this episode, that essentially don't make sense, or it doesn't add up to the point of like, oh yeah, she's no doubt lost her memory. Like they bring up a bunch of ideas, like the idea of oh, what about her phone? Like why hasn't she just looked at her phone? She can see she has a ton of messages from Sarano, from her other friends, right? So that would tell her. And then, coincidentally, her phone is broken, right? And there's a lot of these moments where you're like, oh, interesting. Like, why is that the case? Like, why does she do that? Why does she act that way? And there's even certain moments where she talks to Sarano that makes you think, wait a minute, like, does she know? And I feel like she has some slip ups from time to time again, right? That make you think, oh yeah, she's actually she doesn't actually have amnesia. I'm not saying she doesn't, actually have cancer, because she definitely does, but she doesn't have amnesia. And I think it's really for the greater good, because even at the end of this episode, and I know I'm skipping around a lot, but even at the end of this episode, we get a point where she essentially tells Sarano, like, would you want me to remember you and all this stuff, and that it would be annoying if I did. But then she brings up something that's interesting. What she ends up bringing up is the fact that, well, I have 6 months to live, so wouldn't it be better if I didn't remember you, or you didn't remember me, or you just moved on? Wouldn't it just be better? And in my opinion, I don't know if someone with amnesia would say stuff like this, right? Maybe they would, but I feel like when someone is talking to you, trying to see you for more, right? And they're basically telling you we used to know each other, all this stuff. I feel like you would have had a little bit more thought into essentially okay, yeah, we used to know each other, but what were we to each other? What I feel like you would have a lot of questions. You wouldn't just immediately be like, no, you should forget about me. Now, I might sound like I'm coping, which, hey, I probably am, but I feel like a part of me is just screaming that she is making the sacrifice right now. She herself knows that she's going to die in 6 months, or at least that is the idea right now, is that she's going to die in 6 months. And she's like, if I'm going to die in 6 months, I don't want these people to be so attached to me that they're gonna be so sad and heartbroken, even more than they could be, right? Because imagine if they continued dating, right? Or imagine if Sarano and her continued, understanding each other, becoming boyfriend, girlfriend, stuff like that. He would be 10 times more heartbroken when she passed away. So I think for her, she's definitely thinking, okay, I have to distance myself from these people, right? And make it so that I'm the one that takes on this heavy burden, because at the end of the day, she really is, right? She is going to take on this heavy burden that she's essentially like saying like, no, like I'm not gonna, be friends with them anymore. And I think a big thing that is said in that episode, in this episode, is that she straight up says, wouldn't it be better if I didn't remember you, right? Wouldn't it be better if we didn't, if you didn't really know me that well or whatever? Wouldn't it be better if that's the case? And I was like, damn, like that is something that is very interesting to say in a moment like this, I feel. And I just feel like Fuyutsuki is obviously doing the right thing to a large extent, because let's be honest, that would be a brutal thing to go through. I think we all understand that. We all know that it would be a horrible, brutal thing to go through, to watch a friend of yours, a loved one, right? Someone you really care about die, right? It's a horrible feeling, and it's going to be completely tragic. But the reality is, I think Fuyutsuki is making that self-sacrifice, especially when she literally says she has 6 months to live. Now, with that said, let's talk about the 6 months. We know that she got amnesia from chemo, right? But she has essentially said, I have 6 months to live, and there is nothing they can do about it. That's essentially what she said. So why would she put herself through chemo, right? Why would she go through chemo? Because she already knows she has 6 months to live, and there's nothing that they can do about it. Now, am I still holding out hope that this 6 month stuff, it actually doesn't come true? Hopefully there's a miracle. Hopefully she lives longer. Of course I feel that way, and I want that to be the case, but we don't know for a fact, right? We don't know anything really, especially in the anime. And I haven't read the manga or the light novels. I haven't touched those, but I will say that is the hope, right? The hope is that she doesn't end up having 6 months to live, but let's just say in theory, she does. She has 6 months to live. She's told that. Why would she go through chemo? So if she doesn't go through chemo, then guess what? She doesn't have chemo amnesia, or, the forgetting thing when you go through chemo and you forget, right? She wouldn't have that. Now, I'm not saying that she's lying, like in the way of like it's a bad thing, because I think this is the most honorable thing that she could have ever done. I think this is the most self-sacrificing thing she could have ever done. I mean, I have so much, I know it's a fake character, but if this was a real person, and I'm sure there's people out there that have done this is the most respectful thing that I could think of. Like, you are so honorable that you are doing this, because the reality is everybody around you is going to suffer. They are. And when you're gone, they're going to keep suffering. And it would be a lot easier, a lot better if they forgot about you, right? If they distance themselves, the process of grieving would be easier. And you might say, well, they're still going to grieve. And of course, you're going to grieve a good friend of yours. But the reality is, if they had more time together, they spent more and more time together, especially for Sarano, he would have fell in love even more. And then guess what? He would have had his heart broken, shattered, destroyed way more than what he has now. And I think that's the reality of it, right? The reality is that Sarano would be so much more broken than he ever would have been, in this, in this sense. But I think the reality is, for me, I think there's a lot of moments in this episode that point to basically her, I don't want to say faking it, because that sounds wrong, right? That sounds bad. But I think it's pointing to her acting as if she has amnesia, because she definitely has cancer, but she acting that she has amnesia so that her friends can get over her easier. And so, frankly, that they can separate themselves from her and eventually have a life that is normal. Because there's times in this episode, like I said, especially when she's talking about college, stuff like that, worrying about her, about his college, about what he's doing, about how he's doing all this stuff. And it makes you think okay, she definitely knows something, right? And there's a lot of things she says that you can make the argument that she knows it because of certain circumstances, right? She knows it because, oh yeah, you're a college student, so of course she knows, right? Of course she knows that essentially that he's he's a college student, right? She knows that he's a college student, but she's just worried if, you know, he's doing well in his classes and stuff like that. There's certain things she says that are borderline that she would only know if she had her memories, but it kind of gets spun to the fact that, like, you know, that, oh, it's just her knowing little things that she picked up throughout the days. And I think overall it's a pretty emotional episode. I mean, this guy Sarno is crying his eyes out, like legitimately crying his eyes out, and it sucks. It really, really is hurtful to watch. But I think, like, in all honesty, yeah, it's bringing me a ton of sadness, but I'm holding on to hope that she not only is going to either get her memories back, or more specifically, she's actually faking her memories, and that when she gets to the point where she should be dead, right, she should die after 6 months, she ends up living, right? She ends up living, and maybe it's a misdiagnosis, and they're like, hey, you have a lot more time than we thought, and she decides that the separation she had from the people she cares about, especially Sarno, is too much for her, and she needs to go back to them. She needs to be with them. And dude, I want that last episode, or some sort of, like, you know, later episode, to be Sarno and her reconnecting, her apologizing, them confessing, and all of the above. I mean, I would adore that so much, and I want to see what happens, because Sarno is hurt beyond belief, beyond your imagination. He is. And in a way, she is honorable for doing what she's doing, but Sarno was already in love with her, and it's gonna hurt him so badly, right? And it's hurting him so badly, not only knowing that she's gonna die, but also that she doesn't know him. She doesn't remember him. She doesn't remember anything. And I'm just sitting here like, damn, I'm holding on to hope that, you know, we can get to the point where she ends up admitting, like, no, I do remember you. Like, I remember all this. I'm sorry. I was scared. I didn't want you to miss me and grieve me the way that you would if we continued down the path that we were, continued, like, you know, loving each other, all that stuff. I hope we eventually get to that point, and I really hope that at the end of this season, it's not us burying Fuyutsuki, because I might never watch a romance anime like this ever again. I'm just heartbroken. It's bringing me so much sadness, but I'm holding on to a little bit of hope that we can get some of that happiness back. Now, with that said, I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this anime, about this romance anime, stuff like that. You know, Love Unseen Beneath the Clear Night Sky. I'm absolutely loving it, but I think the reality is it's also making me very, very sad. I mean, it is very, very depressing to a certain extent, but I would love to hear what you guys have to say about the anime, about the video, all that stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, leave a sub, leave a comment down below, all that good stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope all y'all have an amazing day. Later.